Welcome to Creative Piecemeal Podcast, a podcast for creatives. I'm your host, Tammy Takeishi. Join me for compelling conversations with artists, actors, authors, musicians, and other creatives about the impact of the creative and fine arts in their lives and our ever-changing world. Thank you for listening. Hello, and welcome to another episode of Creative Piecemeal Podcast. Today, I am joined by fellow creative and artist Marian Parsons. She is the co-host of the wonderful podcast, The Creative Exponent. If you have not checked it out yet, definitely do that. If you are in that mindset of art and music and all things beautiful like that. Marian is a paint enthusiast and natural encourager. She's the epitome of multi-passionate entrepreneur with a spiderweb of creative endeavors, including writing, photography, design, fine art, furniture refinishing, and home decor. Welcome to the show.
Thank you, Tammy. It's good to be here. That's a very nice introduction. I always love talking with other people who are kind of in that creative world, or they're willing to embrace it. Actually, I think everybody's creative in some form or fashion, but
yes.
Some people embrace it a lot more than others.
Yes. And it's interesting how I stumbled on your podcast a while back when I was looking for names for my podcast. And I was like, oh man, that's a great name that they've got. When I started listening to it, I just love it. And even your website is soothing, all those beautiful natural palettes and
oh, thank you. Yeah, we've had a very good time putting it together.
Yeah, it's one of those podcasts where you can listen to and just your whole body relaxes. It's entertaining, it's interesting. You might pick up some home decor tips, or suddenly you're refurnishing a cabinet you didn't think you were going to do,
So I'm so glad to hear that. Yeah, that's the whole point, is we really want to try to be voices of encouragement to people who are listening and to get them excited and wanting to do things maybe that they haven't done before. So that's great feedback to hear.
So we're going to get started with, how did you get your start as an artist and podcaster?
It's so hard to say, okay, this is the point where it started, because it's such an evolution. I started doing creative work when I was very young, and that started in theater and music. My mom was a music teacher and taught our whole family to play guitar. We used to all sing together, and I did a lot of theater, and that was what I studied in college. I have a degree in musical theater. So I was in that world and decided not to pursue theater professionally. And I ended up needing some sort of creative outlet. If you're someone who that just spills out of you, then my parents used to, when I wasn't doing a play, they'd be like, okay, it's time for you to do a play again. Because I would just be, bubbling to do something. So not having that outlet, I really needed to find another one. So I ended up working on my house and getting really into decorating and sewing and making things. And then that eventually, when I was a mom of two little boys, turned into a decorative painting and mural business. I started doing antiques, and then it just kind of evolved. So for a while, my world was really furniture refinishing and buying and selling antiques. And I just got to the point where I'm like, okay, after finishing a few thousand pieces of furniture and doing upholstery and all of that, and taking 2 20-foot truckloads to a show to sell it all, I'm like, this is not what I want to do for the rest of my life. I feel like I've kind of mastered this. My back is tired from all the moving furniture and upholstery and everything. So I'm ready to shift gears and do something else. And so just a few years ago, I started oil painting and getting more into product design work and pattern design. And then a podcast kind of came out of that, and out of conversations I had with my friend, and she's my co-host, Shauna Parker. And our conversations about creativity and shifting gears and staying curious and being willing to grow and learn and changing when you have an audience on social media, which is difficult because people don't, they get bored with you, but at the same time, they don't want you to change. So it can be a very tense experience. And so the podcast came out of our conversations, and we were just like, we wanted to share it with other people. So it's just this evolution that keeps unfolding and revealing new opportunities and new steps in the journey.
And speaking of the podcast, are you able to say anything about what's upcoming or any next goals?
You know, that's a funny question, because actually last year was a year, I mean, I think 2020 was hard for everybody. And then 2021 was like, we thought it was all going to get better, but then things were still hard and uncertain. And we both Shauna and I just had really tough years in 2021. So we sort of that's sort of what we talked about a lot in the podcast. And we ended up taking more breaks than we intended. And when we took breaks, we took longer breaks. And it was a part of, I think it was a part of being honest about the creative process, because a podcast is an extension of that. So as far as what's in the future, we've really loved having guests. So we want to continue to do that. There's always this exciting energy that comes when you have someone on who's talking about their process and their journey and what they're creating. I find that's really exciting. And I just love personally getting to know them. And then we want to just continue the conversation about, the changing landscape of social media, being a creative and sharing online, and creating in different mediums. So we don't put together a big long calendar for the year. We're just sort of like, let's talk about this today, because this is what we feel like. So it's very, we're actually incredibly organized creatives, but we have kind of a fly by the seat of your pants approach to the podcast, but we don't have sponsors at this point or anything. So we're just able to we're able to do that at this point.
Yeah, there's a freedom in being independent in that sense.
There is, yeah, because we're able to say, well, we're gonna take a break now, or we're gonna do a 10-minute podcast, and then the next one's 40 minutes, and then we're gonna have a guest for the next one. So we really mix it up a lot. And I think this year we were hoping for more consistency, but again, we've just had to adapt as our work schedules and personal lives and all of that have needed attention. So, but we're looking forward to recording some more episodes this year.
Nice. So you mentioned briefly about the creative process, but what is one of your favorite things about it and one of your least favorite things?
Oh man, my favorite thing probably is, I think there's two parts to it. I love collecting inspiration. That is, to me, such an exciting time of discovery. And that's often for me through books. It can be through getting outside in nature, to going to a new place. I love going to antique stores and looking at old things. And I also I love it when inspiration comes from surprising places, like you're watching a movie, or you just hear something someone says when you're not looking for it. They just say something that's this great little springboard that could be a blog post or a podcast or something that you want to create. You want to capture that idea in a painting. So I love gathering inspiration because you get it from so many places and you never know what it's going to be. And I've become kind of this like inspiration hoarder. I want all the books and supplies and all of the stuff. So I'm ready to go and create. And then another part of the creative process that I really love is when you're actually starting to play with your hands. It can be easy to get stuck in the inspiration place because it's when you're just receiving things. And so sometimes I'll just be spending way too much time in my books, and it's like, okay, it's time to put those down and get the supplies out and actually start doing something with them, or to order new supplies and not do anything with them because you feel like you don't have time, or you need to learn them, or you need to take a class first, or you need more inspiration. So, but I love that time when I actually start working with things with my hands. And it can be anything. It can be with paper and paint or fabrics, but just starting to work with my hands always gets ideas going, and it gets me excited to create more. And I think the hardest part is getting over the critical voice that it just comes for everybody. And I think it's so encouraging when you read about other people's creative process, especially reading about like master artists who are known as like the best ever. And so John Singer Sargent comes to mind. In one book I was reading, he was really criticizing this portrait that he did, and he was very unhappy with it and wrote this apologetic letter of how horrible this portrait was, and he didn't feel like it captured a likeness. And just that, knowing that struggle, every artist, no matter what your art is, knows that struggle of, I'm not happy with this. Is it good? And then having to get over that hump. So I think for me, that's the hardest part too, is, that questioning and the criticism that just comes right along with creativity.
Understandable. Yeah. As you mentioned, it happens across all forms of creative art and expression.
Oh, yeah, definitely. I think that there's such a comfort in that when you know that this is just a part of the process, and it can be harnessed for good. It can be harnessed to make you better, to make you learn more and study more and practice more. Or it can do the reverse, and it can make you want to not do anything at all. So I think knowing that it's normal, that negativity and that critical self-talk, knowing that's normal and just pushing through it anyway and working through it anyway. If you put the work in, your work is going to improve over time, no matter what it is. And I think oftentimes people think that when it comes to creative work, that you're either gifted or you're not. And that's just not the case. It's a learned skill, just like anything else. Some people might have a natural leaning towards something, or it might just seem a little easier for them, or they may have a more developed eye, but it's not something that they're born knowing how to do. It's something that takes work and practice, just like a sport or an instrument or anything else.
I was curious, what is a piece of advice about the creative field that you follow, and then a piece of advice that you ignore?
Oh, that's a really good question. So I think one thing that I do follow is to practice. I think that that's something that it's easy to not do, because you want to just kind of get to the work that's sellable, get to the thing that's going to be the finished result. And I think it's hard to get into just the sketchbook and create when it's just for you, it's just for learning, it's just for growth. And I really resisted that for a long time. I felt this tension of, well, if I create something in my sketchbook that's really good, I'm going to be sad that it's just in my sketchbook, and then I won't be able to replicate the magic in on a canvas. Or I'm going to create something that's really bad, and I'm going to be embarrassed by it, that there's this record of how bad I was. So for a long time, I really resisted that. I would be that person who bought a brand new sketchbook and would fill like 2 pages and then would close it and throw it away. And then, a year later would buy another one. So I filled up last year, I think I filled up 4 sketchbooks. And so on top of other works that I did, and I've made it more of a regular practice. So that is something that I follow, that is, I think, just general good advice that you hear from other artists and creatives, which it makes sense too. If you want to play guitar and someone says, well, you need to practice, you're like, well, yes, of course I do. That makes sense. But I think when you are talking about drawing and art, and they say, well, you just need to, if you want to draw people, you need to practice drawing people. It's like, well, I don't know. Wouldn't I just be good at drawing people? It's like, no, you practice, you learn. Like there's mathematics involved, and there's, a place where everything goes on a human face. And when you learn that, the technical side of it, and that practice happens, then it just gets easier and easier, and your eye gets better and all of that. So think practicing is really important. And what I don't follow, I think that there's a lot of advice out there about niching down or niching down and being an expert at one thing. And I'm someone who if you could tell from, my journey, I do a little bit of everything. I do whatever I'm feeling drawn to or excited about. And the idea of saying, this is what I'm going to do, and that's it, I think it's just so limiting. I think that you can do that, but I hear that advice over and over again, that like, if you want to be, especially if you want to turn your art into a business, you have to be a specialist. And I think that can be true, but it doesn't have to be true. There are many, many examples of people who are generalists and who are successful in a variety of fields. So I just throw that advice out and I don't pay attention to it.
And it seems to work for you, to follow your passion or new creative endeavors that capture your interest.
It does. And I think for some people, it becomes too much. They get too distracted, or they don't make progress anywhere because they have too many things happening. So I think you're going to know if that's you or not. If you're someone who wants to do a lot of different things, or if you're someone who needs to just focus on one thing. I think where I don't like the advice is that this is the way it has to be, and this is what everyone has to do, when it's like, no, that's not true. Some people, they're going to do one thing and do it really well, and that's what they're going to do all day for the rest of their life. That's what they're really happy with, and that's okay. And then there are other people who are going to have this very wild, meandering path, and that's okay too. So yeah, I think you should feel the freedom to create in a way that is that works with your personality and your curiosity, and you don't feel inhibited by what other people are saying is the right way to go.
Along the lines of advice, what is one thing you wish you'd known when you started on your creative journey?
I wish I knew that creative work, specifically drawing and painting, was something that would improve with practice. I think, so I was one of those people who years ago, and it was really funny because I did murals, but for some reason I didn't consider murals as art. I considered them as like, I don't know, just kind of fluffy, decorative painting. I just didn't really think of it as art. And I actually tried to paint a couple of barns on canvas, and I was just like, these aren't good. I'm not good. I'm not going to do that. That's not my thing. And so I stuck to painting furniture and walls and all of it, but I felt like I couldn't paint a canvas. I finally just was like, when I envision myself standing at an easel and painting. And I really want to do that. So even if I might be bad at it, I'm just going to give it a go. And I committed to 100 paintings. I did 100 landscape paintings. And I stuck with it. And I saw when I got to number 100, how much I had improved in 100 paintings. And I did it in, I think, about 3 or 4 months. So I did it in a pretty quick time frame. So then I did 100 still life paintings. And then I kept going. And so I wish I would have known younger in life that it was something I could learn to do and practice and study, and it's something that I would get better at. But even though I went to school for a fine art, I think when it comes to music and acting and that sort of thing, I had been doing it from such a young age that I didn't view it. I knew you could get better because I took voice lessons and dance lessons and acting, and I studied it in school and all of that. But I felt like it was kind of this natural ability, and I didn't have that when it came to drawing and painting. I wish I had known that sooner. And I think if more people knew that, they would give it a try. You hear so many people say, oh, I can't draw. And again, it's interesting. You don't hear people say like, oh, I can't play the piano. I just can't do that. It's like, well, have you ever taken a lesson? No. Okay, well, of course you can't play the piano because you've never taken a lesson. You've never practiced. You've never learned what any of the keys are called. You've never learned how chords work. And the same is true of drawing and painting. Of course, you can't draw if you've never practiced drawing. So, or you've never read a book on drawing or taken a class or learned how. So I wish more people knew that and embraced it.
My mom was an artist, and I used to always joke like, oh, I can't even draw a straight line. And I remember in high school for my art credit, because I'm very musical, so I had all that other half the art done. But for my art credit, I took this pottery class, which I thought would be fun. Mm-hmm. It was probably the most personally frustrating / exhilarating classes I've taken, because it was so much harder to not only draw and sketch out your planned pottery, but then to try to create it on the wheel. And I'm like, what am I doing?
Well, and I think with all art, whether you're talking about photography or music or writing or drawing, it is very difficult, because there is this technical component to it where there's all these details that you need to learn. And goodness, pottery, oh my gosh, just all of the chemistry involved and the physics of the wheel and then just, when you put something in a kiln, not knowing, even professionals who make thousands of pieces still have pieces that collapse or that go crooked or that break, or that, they don't know how it's going to turn out. And so that's just the nature of making ceramics. And so there's always this highly technical piece to it, but then there's this artistic, creative, it's all about your own personal expression and what you want to create. And I think putting those two together, that's what makes art, in whatever form it is, I think such a great thing to work on in your life, because it isn't easy, and you can create some really beautiful things that touch and speak to other people and that last for generations.
Agreed. And you can really learn a lot about yourself and how much patience you do or don't have.
Yes, definitely. It teaches you a lot of patience. I have had a lot of canvases and panels just end up in the trash because I just can't look at them anymore. And there are seasons where I've had to walk away from painting for a little while and do something else. But I think that's another reason why I like to do a lot of different things. I was a little stuck on painting last year. It was just a tough season for me, and I had a lot going on, and I felt like I didn't have the painting to give. I just didn't have the creative energy to give to that. So I started doing some other things. I did knitting, and I made this embroidery stitch book, and just worked with my hands in a totally different way. And it satisfied that desire to create. And it also gave me kind of this renewed energy when I did go revisit my painting. It just did something within me. It works your brain, it works your hands, and it gave me some fresh ideas to approach my paintings with.
Nice. That actually leads so nicely into the next question, which is, if you could do any creative pursuit that you're not already doing or have done, what would that be?
Oh, I'd love to do pottery. I think that would be so fun. I have a few books on that. And what has stopped me is I can't just buy all the supplies and do it in my house. It's something you really have to, you can do that, but that's an enormous investment in space and all. And I just haven't gotten to a local studio to take a class and work on it. But I think that would be really fun to explore at some point, and especially to work in 3D. So that's something I would like to do in the future. And so many things. I want to do it all. I always love discovering new mediums to work with and things to play with. I've been really into needlework lately, and doing more with I've sewn for years, but doing more hand embroidery and stuff. And then how could I combine that with sketching and painting? And so that's something I'm playing with as well.
Nice. And I know that the hand embroidered, very witty quotes are in right now.
Right. They are. Yeah. And I have found I'm less of a person who likes to follow a pattern. I'm less likely to buy a kit, or if I do buy a kit, I end up throwing out the instructions and just doing my own thing. So I really love kind of free form embroidery. I did last year, I got into lino cutting. And so I did some lino printing on fabric, and I'd love to do some more of that. And I took the lino prints that I did on fabric and then embroidered them. And that was just so fun. It was combining all these things I had just learned. And now it's like, well, now I need to figure out what I could do with it, beyond just having it. But I'm excited to pursue that more.
So you mentioned that you like to read and absorb various books. So over the past few years, what's a book that you read that challenged you and a book that inspired you?
Oh, that's good. Okay. There's so many books. I actually just did a post on my blog about like my art book collection, which is over 300 books now. So there's so many books to choose from. But I think one that really inspired me, and I have read through it a few times because it's just so good, is Steal Like an Artist. And it's a very short, quick read. It's by Austin Kleon, and it is, he actually has 3 books and they're all very good. Show Your Work, Keep Going, and Steal Like an Artist. But Steal Like an Artist, I think, really gives you permission to find inspiration. I think that's it's such a gray area. I mean, not when you're talking about like direct copyright infringement, but when you're talking about gathering inspiration from people who have created before you and how long that's been going on and what a history of apprenticeship there is in the art world. This book is just has such a great fresh perspective on using inspiration in your work in a way to do that that's not, copyright infringement.
Right.
It's mainly looking at people of the past and obviously looking at nature and other things around you. So that book is really good. As far as a book that challenged me, I'm actually listening to it right now and I'm not done with it yet, but it's called The Practice by Seth Godin. It's just like little nuggets of thoughts about creative work and about specifically then sharing it and selling creative work. And there have been so many great nuggets in there that spoke directly to things that I find to be a struggle, specifically creating in this world where you're sharing your work on social media. And I think that it's such a wonderful thing because I have people buying my artwork who never would have even known I was creating it, and people who want to feature my work who never would have known I was creating it. So it's a wonderful way to be found and to connect with people who are interested in your work. But it also comes with this whole just negativity, and everybody who's on social media knows what I'm talking about, that angst that comes with what do I share, and will this get enough likes, and will the algorithm like this, and seeing, a window into everyone's studio or workspace who does something similar to what you do. And that comparison, it's just a challenge. But in the book, The Practice, it addresses a lot of kind of common struggles that creatives experience, specifically creatives who are trying to create work to sell. I've found the advice in it to be really challenging and also just encouraging and freeing. So both of those are great books if you are a creative specifically who sells your work.
Excellent. I'll put those in the show notes, links to those books. So you grew up obviously doing music and musical theater. Do you feel like any of that bled over into your work, or even the processes of doing those things bleed over into your adult creative life?
Oh, I definitely do. I think that everything that you do in your life, it builds you into who you are. And even though the path that I took doesn't seem to make a lot of sense, like you'd never meet with a guidance counselor in high school and say, okay, here's the career path I want to take. I'm going to do musical theater in school, and then I'm going to work at a bank and some retail because I don't know quite what I'm going to do next. And then I'm going to trip and fall into the world of technical and government recruiting for a few years. And then I'll be a stay-at-home mom. And then I'll start a decorative painting and mural business. And then I'll be a blogger. And then I'll be an artist. Like, you just don't, we're doing things now that when I graduated from high school, we didn't even know were careers. There wasn't even a blog. There wasn't social media. The internet was just like email and the very beginnings of AOL. I think you never know what the possibilities are going to bring. But what I see is, even though that path just seems crazy, like no one would plan that out, everything I did made me who I am today. I learned in the world of technical recruiting, I learned how to be professional. I learned how to communicate on a professional level. I learned how to prepare candidates for interviews so they could present themselves for job opportunities, which I have to do all the time as a freelance writer and photographer, stylist. I have to sell myself. So I learned a lot from that. In musical theater, I'm comfortable with being on the camera and being interviewed for podcasts. So that really prepared me for being online. And even just, I did about a year at a bank, and even just that, learning how to handle money when I was doing antique fairs and had to deal with large volumes of cash at the end of the day. I was like super comfortable counting that and making sure all my bills are facing the right way and strapping them. And I knew what quantities needed to be strapped together and everything. Like it's so random, but it just all kind of came together. And so what I do now, it makes sense with how I grew up and what I learned and what I did along the way as a young adult. So definitely, I think look at your own, meandering path of your life. And when you do that and can really have gratitude for all the things you learned along the way, even if it wasn't what you wanted to do at the time, or you weren't happy there, it didn't seem like, you wanted to go do something creative, but you were in the corporate world or whatever, to really have gratitude for what you learned during those times, because it really does all make you who you are.
Very true. And you pick up so many great business and practical skills that one needs when they're an entrepreneur in their sort of creative realm.
Yeah. And I think I'm always so encouraging of kids who want to get degrees in the art field, because I think a lot of times kids are discouraged from doing that, or they're encouraged to do a plan B, like, okay, you can get your art degree or theater degree or music degree or whatever, but you need to minor in business, or you need to minor in teaching, and that's not a bad idea. That's a good plan. But there are so many, I think that devalues how many wonderful things that you learn when you study art at a college level. I think about all the things I learned in musical theater. From not only did we learn tap dancing and singing and dancing, which that's what everybody thinks of, but we took these classes on how to manage a career when you are your product. And that was such a valuable class. I actually still have the notes from that class, and I looked at them a few years ago, and I was like, this is just gold here for life, and for being able to go to interviews and sit down and make eye contact with people. It's an audition. It taught me so many good life skills, and also just about being unafraid to go up and put yourself out there, to know you're not going to always get the part, or sometimes you're going to get the part that you don't want. And it's not always because you're not good. It's sometimes because someone else was just better for that specific part. It might be that it was the director's daughter who was auditioning for the same part that you were. It's just, you just learn about life and learn to shrug it off and keep going. And so I think, and you learn those things in music as well, and in drawing and painting, because when your work is studied, or you're having to audition to be a specific chair in an orchestra, you just have to learn to to put yourself out there, and then to be tough when you don't always get the answer you want. So anyway, there's just a little encouragement. If you have creative kids and they're talking about going off to an art school, I hope you can encourage them and see the value of that.
Yeah. I always feel that it's better to just try and to follow your passion as far as you are comfortable, and then just see where it takes you,
Oh, I totally agree. And I think, like, when it comes to schooling, so many people get degrees in things that they never end up using anyway. They end up doing something else or taking vocational classes that then are what they end up having a career in. So it's like, if you don't know for sure that you want to go be a doctor or lawyer or something, then you might as well study something that you really love and enjoy, and kind of allow that path of discovery that happens with most kids around that age. Just allow that to happen while you're doing something that really lights you up.
So I had a musical theater question for you. What is one of your favorite musicals? And if you had to be cast in it, what role would you love?
Oh, okay. Again, like that's so hard because there's so many good musicals. Well, when it comes to my favorite, it changes depending on the season, like what I'm just in the mood for, and also what new musicals come out. Like I really have enjoyed Dear Evan Hansen. I think it's such a touching story, great music. And I love Hamilton. Of course, it's just so brilliant the way it's presented. And I had the chance to see that in person a few years ago, and it was just absolutely stunning. So I enjoy those, but I love classic musicals as well. Some of the old school ones like Les Mis and Miss Saigon and all those. And I love some really obscure ones as well, like Jane Eyre and Whistle Down the Wind, and just some that most people haven't heard of, but have wonderful music and really interesting stories. But I think a part that I'd love to play, I think as far as singing goes, it might be Elphaba and Wicked.
Ooh, nice.
I wouldn't be necessarily like, that would not be my type. I wouldn't be typed as that, but for singing, I would love to sing that part. I'd also love to do the role in Little Women of Jo. I think that would be a fun one to sing as well. But I'm way too old for either of those parts. I'm like 20 years too old. So
those are great music for all of those.
Oh yeah, I love musicals. I listen to them a lot when I paint and work, and so even though I'm not doing it on the stage, I still sing a lot just on my own time.
There was a show on Apple TV called Schmigadoon, which is like a TV show that parodies musicals.
Yeah,
it was so great.
Yeah, I have it on my watch list. I haven't seen it yet, but yeah, I'm familiar with Brigadoon, which is the musical that it's kind of a parody of, and which is such a bizarre story. So it's really funny to see them kind of poke fun at that. Yeah, a lot of those old musicals like Carousel and Oklahoma and stuff, just the way they were written, they would basically crank out all these songs and then they'd be like, okay, let's put a story around them. So that's how you end up with all these random like dream sequences and like really bizarre stories, because they were just kind of written a little haphazardly. I mean, they're wonderful, but it definitely created this sort of quirky musical theater genre from that time period. So anyway, but I'll have to watch that. I haven't seen it yet.
It's really cute. I think you'd like it. What is a common stereotype in your field, and how do you hope to break that with your work? Not only as a person who makes art, but as a person who's influencing, being on social media with a podcast and things of that nature.
Yeah, I think that there's an idea that either you're creative or you're organized and have a good business mind, like type A or type B, or you're creative or not creative. And people just aren't that simple. We're all very complex creatures. And so I think that you can be someone who's incredibly organized and also have this wonderful creative mind. I think that you can be someone who's very disorganized and be incredibly analytical. And so I think this idea of, well, if you're creative, automatically you're, messy and you're going to be late and you're going to need help managing your finances. I think it's just not true. It's just not. I know so many creatives who are very proficient when it comes to the business end of managing their career. And I think magic really happens when you can kind of harness both sides of things. And then, if you're not that way, if you are just kind of a mess on your own, then, to know and get some help so that so you don't end up being a mess. Like other people can make you look a little better than you actually are, which we all do need that at times. So yeah, that stereotype kind of drives me a little crazy.
Yeah.
So yeah. So I'd love to see that. And I think I think people on social media who are sharing more of their process and their studios, and I think that is kind of shedding light on that wow, their space is really neat and tidy and clean, and they're a creative, or, they have this amazing business course that's just brilliant, and yet they're an artist. So I think, and you see that again with a lot of different disciplines, people who are teaching others how to play guitar, and they have this amazing app and a great sequence of videos to watch on YouTube. And so anyway, it's possible for it all to coexist within an individual.
I definitely agree there that stereotype needs to just be gone.
It does. I think it does more harm than good anyway, because it just enables people who are not naturally organized, or who maybe struggle with kind of some of the business and like their taxes and finances. It kind of can be this excuse, well, I'm just creative, so I just can't do it. It's again, like it's a learned skill. It might not come naturally for you. It might be difficult. Like I hate taxes, and I hate managing. I hate putting in receipts and all this stuff, but I'm running a business. I have to make sure that I'm tracking my expenses, and I'm tracking who owes me money, and make sure that I can collect it and all of that. And so I use a software program. I have an accountant who does all the tricky stuff for me. So it doesn't mean you have to do it all on your own, but you have to be smart about what you can do and what you can't do, and then make sure that you outsource the things that you're unable to do or that you're not good at, so then you can be good at the things you're good at.
Excellent advice. Last question. It's a sort of a fun one. What is your favorite movie, and what does it reveal about you?
That's another hard one, to pick your favorite movie. I think for years, I'll just preface this by saying I am really a miniseries fan. I love miniseries because I feel like, so I'm one of the people who's always like, the book is better, but I also love watching the movie because it brings it to life. It shows you someone's artistic, what their impression of the book is, what was important to them, how they visually saw it. So I love like seeing that art come to life. But I feel like it's the movies always feel rushed, like you can't quite get enough into them. So I love particularly period drama miniseries out of England. Yes, I'm getting the thumbs up from you. Yes. It's like they can't make them fast enough. It's like BBC, ITV, can you just like crank those out as quickly as possible just for me? You can remake all Dickens, Jane Austen, all of that stuff. I'll give you two favorite movies that are totally different, but one of them is a period drama. I love Sense and Sensibility, the one with Emma Thompson and Kate Winslet. I don't know if it's like my favorite movie of all time, but it's definitely up there. It's a beautiful movie. I love the story. I love the contrast of the two sisters in the Jane Austen story. I just think it's really good. I love the miniseries of it as well. That's more recent, done by the BBC. But I also, another favorite movie that's totally different, not a period drama, is The Secret Life of Walter Mitty. And it's one of those movies that, you watch it and you think, Ben Stiller, it's going to be kind of slapstick or whatever, but it is. And there's some silly moments, definitely, but the heart of the movie really is about living the life that you envision yourself living. And there's kind of that journey through the movie. I don't know if you've ever seen it, but there's that journey through the movie of, he's in the suit and in the office, and he's dreaming about what he could be and what he could do, and kind of the unfulfilled dreams, the backpack that was bought to backpack through Europe and it went unused. And I think that so many of us have that. We have those art supplies that we bought, or that instrument that we bought or classes we signed up for, or we envision ourselves doing something that we just think is too hard or we won't be good at, and we don't do it. So man, every time I watch that movie, I'm just so like touched and inspired, and it makes me want to live the life that I envision myself living and not just envision it. And it gets me doing things like buying an easel so I can do oil painting and all of that. So it's a good one. I suggest watching it. Yeah.
Excellent. Well, Marian, thank you so much for being on the podcast.
Oh, thank you so much. It was really great chatting with you, Tammy.
You too. And listeners, please check the show notes for links to the Creative Exponent, and make sure to check out Marian's wonderful art. Thanks for listening to the podcast. Like the show? Have a question? Stop by the Facebook and Instagram pages. Links are in the show notes, or search for Creative Piecemeal Podcast on social media and click follow for all the latest.